What's happening, everyone? So, I'm here to do a post season reflection on Arsenal, how things went down, and overall feelings and thoughts about the campaign and everything that's happened. So, obviously, at the weekend, it didn't go according to hope in terms of what we wanted to see as Arsenal fans from the final day. We beat Everton, it was tricky. Everton had some game. They were quite organised. They made it difficult for us. We were a bit edgy. I felt like the team reflected how the fans were feeling. They maybe have half an eye on the Man City game and just maybe weren't fully focused on what they needed to do. But we got enough. We did enough to get a 2-1 victory. But ultimately, we still fell 2 points short because Manchester City did their job and beat West Ham 3-1, as I think most people thought they would. So I think people, just to reflect on the season, I think it's been a progressive season where we've moved forward. We've definitely taken a step forwards, taken it to the final day, challenging Man City for the title. And also just demonstrating a little bit more of a stamina and endurance to last the course, maybe a bit more experience, tactical awareness and understanding of how to play under pressure. I think in these last 6 games, so obviously we lost to Aston Villa prior to these last 6 games, but I feel in the run-in, we've really shown an ability to win matches whilst not being at our best, because I thought really we were only at our best against Chelsea in that 5-0. I didn't think we were that great against Wolves, nor against Tottenham, United, Bournemouth even had their moments. And on the last day against Everton, there was no dominant performance. It was actually quite a tight affair in many ways, although we did miss chances. We were the better team, but ultimately we did need a 89th, 90-minute winner. So we weren't at our scintillating best in these last 6 games, but what impressed me was the fact that despite that, and despite playing with an element of impending feeling of being forlorn, that impending sense of this might not amount to anything, I still felt as if we fronted up and did well enough in those last 6 games. I think something that strikes me, people, and I want to say well done to Man City, of course, and I think they are the best team in the world, and they deserve all of the plaudits for how good they are, how well they keep the ball, how well they look after the ball, how they dominate games. They really are a formidable force, and they're not unbeatable. I think Arsenal can get one over on them next season, for example. I do think we can finish ahead of them next year in the league. But Man City, to their credit, and Pep Guardiola 4th in a row, it's incredible. But something that has really disappointed me in these last 6 weeks of the season has been the complete lack of resistance from Manchester City's opponents. Now, I'm honestly, guys, speaking authentically, this is how I see it. Whether there's a tinge of subjectivity, given the fact I'm an Arsenal fan, maybe. But I've just felt as if Man City's opponents have just waved the white flag. And it's almost felt as if, the way I see it, certain teams, they look at their fixture list in the last 10 games, when it's really the nitty-gritty of the season, and they identify which matches are we most likely to get points in. So they're really pragmatic. They go through their list of fixtures. They see Man City, they think, okay, least likely we'll get anything out of this game, hence we'll expend the least amount of energy and effort in trying to do so. I really think clubs almost pick and choose those matches when they really want to put in maximum effort, because after all, they may think, why would we want to put in maximum effort if ultimately we're going to lose anyway? And I kind of feel that may have happened in some of these matches, because I just felt as if Brighton, Wolves, who else did Man City play in this run-in that just completely folded over? Fulham. It was just really disappointing to see that none of them threw a candle to Man City. And as I've said, it's not a slight on Man City because they're an incredible team and they're a very dominant team, and they are a difficult team to contain and to dominate because they are so suppressive in how they go about things. They suffocate you. They're amazing in the press. Like when I was watching them against West Ham, they just didn't give West Ham any breathing space. They were on them all the time, and it's no wonder they force errors from you, like the one Bernardo Silva pinched it off Højbjerg, I believe, or it might have been Foden in the first half against Tottenham. Had the shot which Vicario did really well to save, but that was just an example that Man City are rushing you all the time, even in your own penalty box. You've got to do things so quickly that you can easily miscue or shank a clearance, and Man City are going to take advantage and pounce. So they do deprive you of the freedom and the time to play your football. I do accept that, but I just feel surely teams have got to be better at giving City more of a challenge, because I didn't see anyone throw any sense of competition down to them, and it just left me feeling this impending sense of inevitability. Like after we lost to Aston Villa that 2-0, I just felt, I knew we had it in us to respond. It didn't surprise me that we responded, but I kind of felt like, hey, I don't know if Man City's opponents are going to have it in them to bring about any kind of lost points, and that's how it proved to be. So those were just some reflections that I had, people, on those last few games of the season, and it just did feel as if our efforts were going to ultimately end in vain in terms of our pursuit of a Premier League title. But if we look at the season as a whole, and obviously we have to take responsibility for our own performance and our own outcome, because one other thing I learned, people, is that I don't like that feeling of having our fate in other teams' hands. So that feeling of relying on Tottenham, that feeling of hoping Fulham can do something, or hoping a David Moyes West Ham can do something, it just really frustrated me, because I found myself thinking, oh, can Moyes do us a favour? And when Moyes was sort of in his press conference playing the whole like stiff upper lip vibe, when he was kind of saying, no, we're not here to do any favours for Declan, I kind of felt a bit like, I wish I wasn't relying on this guy's team to do us a favour, because I just want us to be in a position where we can just beat other teams, because I think we've got it in us, people. And if we look back over the season, those 5 losses obviously hurt, and Man City only 3 losses, so that's a big difference. I think we've won the same number of games, give or take, but Man City have picked up 2 extra draws and have lost 2 fewer games, so that explains the 2-point deficit. So we lost 2 games to Aston Villa, 1 game to Newcastle, 1 game to Fulham, and 1 game to West Ham. So in amongst all that, there are winnable matches. So you could argue that we were the better team in a couple of those at least. The Aston Villa away game, the West Ham home game especially. Newcastle game was tight, and the VAR decision was obviously controversial. But let's say there were more points out there. There's a feeling that we've left some points out there, so to speak. And those are the areas we need to look at. And I think clinicality, guys, is a big one. Converting opportunities, because we're creating opportunities. That's why my number 1 priority signing, people, this summer would be Alexander Isak from Newcastle, because I just think he's one of the best finishers in the Premier League. And what I love about Isak is how he times his runs. He'll notice when the attacking midfielder's got the ball, he'll start bending his run, and if he's got Martin Odegaard feeding him, that combination I think would be extra special, because Odegaard would just pick him out and Isak would bury it. So I think Mikel might have to be a little bit accepting of the need to bring in a number 9, because that may mean he might have to recognise that the Kai Havertz signing, as good as it was and as well as he's done, isn't the long-term definitive answer up front. Not to say Havertz can't do a job in some games as number 9, but I want to see Alexander Isak leading that line, people. I would make him the priority signing in the summer. And Mikel mentioned the need for improving the current crop. I think that's valid. I think we do need to improve, and I think a big part of that improvement is decision making in the final third, because I think often I've seen Martinelli shoot when he could have passed. I've seen Trossard shoot when he should have passed. And those two I would identify the most. I think Saka, Ødegaard are really good at knitting things together, and their decision making is very sound in my opinion. But Trossard, Martinelli, at times I've been left frustrated watching them and thinking, okay, you've kind of gone for glory there when there's a simple layoff. And I always remember people when Germany beat Brazil in that World Cup semi-final 6-1 back in 2014. The amount of goals they scored, just like passing it around and finding a player that was in a better position to score, they would then find an empty net, so to speak, because they'd manoeuvred the ball in such a way as to take the defence out. And that's what I want to see Arsenal do, not to pass it into the net, but to just have that composure of thinking, is my mate in a better position? If he is, I'm going to lay him off. And yeah, trust in that player's ability to score, because I think in this day and age, people are obsessed with their stats, their numbers, and how that's reflecting on the appraisals they get from fans, from the media, from the manager after the game. But what I want to see is decision making, and sometimes that doesn't grab the headlines. But I want to see that as a big area of improvement, and I want to see Mikel really working on that with the likes of Martinelli, Trossard, Havertz, etc. Of course, improving the other players as well, Saka, what have you. I think Martin Ødegaard is the consummate example of someone who always looks to play his mate in, even when he may be in a position to shoot. Maybe Ødegaard might have to go the other way and sometimes shoot a little bit more. So there are these little coaching tweaks that I think would yield a lot more goals. I think we'd score an extra goal a game, to be honest, if we fix that up. We just prioritise that a little bit. Because I think defensively we're really sound. I think the midfield combinations are working. I still think something as well after the Chelsea game I noticed was maybe a slight drop off in the combinations between Rice, Partey and Ødegaard, because I thought those three combined really well against Chelsea, but then in the subsequent games I felt we were a bit less coherent, a bit more disjointed in that area. So I do feel that's one other aspect that I'd like to see an improvement in. And yeah, I think those are my main thoughts, people, from a tactical perspective. And just to look at the transfer window a little bit more. So I mentioned Isak. I want him as the priority signing. And if that is to be our only attacking player that we bring in, I would be okay with that. I do think backup for Saka is something I'd like, but I wouldn't say it's top 3 priority. I'd say it's 4th level priority. I think the number 9 is top, and then I would say midfielder is closely followed by the number 9 and number 2 in terms of priority. Midfielder, I would say an 8 or a 6, maybe one that had the ability to do both. So that's why I'm thinking maybe a Douglas Luiz would be perfect, because I think he's got that ability to get forward, i.e. in more of a number 8 role, progressing the play. But I do think he's got that awareness about him to sit and be a 6. So in an emergency situation, he could play there. So maybe Douglas Luiz would be my preferred midfield option. This is obviously contingent upon players wanting to come and clubs being willing to sell. But if those two things were there and Arsenal and I was the guy making the decisions, I think Isak and Douglas Luiz would be 2 that I'd look to bring in. And then the third, I'd like a backup centre-back. Because I think we've got enough cover at full-back now, because we've got Zinchenko, Timber, Tomiyasu, White, Kivior, who can play either left or right back or both. And I think that's kind of enough. And obviously within that, a couple of those guys, 2 or 3 of them would, or maybe even all of them, except Zinchenko, could fill in at centre-back if we had a crisis there. But the player I'd like to bring in, people, is one of the Crystal Palace central defenders, whether that's Anderson or Gehi. Now, I think there are merits to bringing both in. I love the way Anderson can ping a long pass. His diagonal passing is phenomenal. Really, really good on the ball. I think Gehi He's a very good all-round defender. I think he can get his he can get his blocks in, clearances. He reads the game well, and again, neat and tidy on the ball. So, if we could get one of those two, I would sign for that for sure. In terms of who I prefer, it's tricky actually. I'm not even sure if I do have a preference. I'd possibly say the only reason I'm leaning slightly towards Gehi is because I feel like he'd maybe be more accepting of a role in which he was initially going to start maybe most games on the bench, but then be broken in gradually. Whereas I feel Anderson, I think he's the captain at Palace, maybe he's not going to want to come to a club where he's sitting on the bench. This is just me thinking out loud. It might not be the case. So I think maybe Gehi would fit the bill. So those would be my three signings, people, that I'd go for in the summer. Isak, Douglas Luiz, Marc Gehi. If I was to add a fourth, like I said, people, it would be that backup right winger. Who would that be? Obviously, I think Elise would be very expensive. So I'm not sure that would be possible. Yeah, I would love Elise to be the player, but I don't think we'd have enough funds for it. If let's say they're using my logic and that position is their fourth priority, I don't think we could afford 60 million for our fourth priority player. So maybe Bryan Mbeumo of Brentford could be an option to step in there in right midfield or the attacking right side. Yeah, so those are two options, people, that could prove sensible. Yeah, I can't really. Neto has been spoken about. I'm not convinced with Neto. He's very injury prone. Good player, but I don't know. I think Mbeumo would be my choice because I think he'd be a lot cheaper than Neto and Elise. And I think again, a bit like what I was saying about Gehi, I think he'd come and be aware that he wouldn't be the starting choice initially and that he was going to understand his role as a squad player, occasionally get games, of course, in all the competitions, but he'd understand that Saka was probably going to get the lion's share and he'd have to work his way through. So I think those would be my four signings, people, I'd go with. Isak, Douglas Luiz, Marc Gehi, and Bryan Mbeumo. So be interested to hear your thoughts on that, people. In terms of outgoings, because obviously with profit and sustainability, etc., we would need to balance that off with some outgoings. I'm not too sure. I think Nketiah, I think it's time maybe to listen to offers. I really like Eddie. I love what he's given to Arsenal. He's a wholehearted player, very good finisher. And I think he would be an asset to any team, but I think it would work for both parties for Nketiah to get some first team football at another Premier League club. Maybe there's scope to strike up a bit of a deal with Brentford, some sort of swap, Mbeumo and Nketiah. And he's one guy I'd think about selling. Smith Rowe is another one. Not sure if he's quite on the right trajectory with his Arsenal career. It feels like it has petered out and dwindled. Don't get me wrong, those kinds of situations can always turn the other way and flip back round, and there might be a long-term plan for Smith Rowe. It might have been the case that Arteta was trying to build up his minutes and his fitness and then give him a bit more of a run next season. That could be the case. So that's one option as a sale, people. Another one, maybe Thomas Partey. I think overall this season, obviously he was injured a lot, but when he did feature, I think there were elements of rustiness in there and also some sloppy moments giving the ball away. I think he had a very good game against Chelsea, but other than that, I didn't see much from him. And if we are to sign a Douglas Luiz, maybe we could recoup some funds by selling Partey. I'd probably still look to keep Vieira. Nelson's another one where maybe he could be sold if the right offer came in. If we were to sign a couple of attacking players, maybe there isn't as much of a place for Nelson. Ramsdale possibly could get a fee for him if the Raya move is made permanent, maybe Ramsdale may be moved on, and then perhaps we could get a second choice keeper who's probably more happy to sit on the bench, maybe a slightly older keeper. So those are my thoughts, people, initially. But to sum up, reflection of the season, I'm immensely proud of the team, people, for the steps we've taken. I really am. I'm super proud of Arsenal at the moment, and I've really loved this season. I love how we're playing. I love the direction Mikel's taken us, and the current crop of players, they're just so likeable. I really enjoyed watching Arsenal this season. In terms of my standout players, people, Declan Rice has been phenomenal. Incredible signing in midfield. William Saliba, just imperious at the back. Gabriel alongside him, just didn't put a foot wrong, was aggressive, winning his duels, combative. Saka on the right, I thought it was exceptional. Consistent output, and I think against Everton we saw how much we missed him when Martinelli played in that position. And Martin Odegaard, people, as well. I think he's been incredible this season, really stepped up as a creator of genuine world class, in my opinion. And also Ben White. I want to give Ben White a mention. I think he's been excellent at right back. So just a few mentions there, people, in terms of my players of the year. I want to mention Trossard as well. I've really liked what I've seen of him. I think he's a really, really good option for us moving forward. Havertz has been solid as well. So those are my thoughts, people, on the season. Let me know if you've got anything to add. And let's take a rest. I think we all need a bit of a breather now going into the summer. But yeah, much to look forward to, people, next season. We'll come back with renewed belief and renewed energy, I'm sure, for next campaign. All right, people. Peace. Love.